So, what did medieval people actually eat? Spoiler, it wasn't dragon meat, but it might have been peacock, porridge, or pigeon in a pie. Let's take a seat at a 13th century table. No forks allowed. Peasant meals, what the common folk ate. For peasants, food was about survival, nothing more, nothing less. Their diet was based on availability, affordability, and how well they could store ingredients over the year. In general, peasant meals consisted of barley bread, pottage, a thick vegetable stew, onions, cabbage, and turnips. Protein was a rare treat, often appearing only during special occasions. Breakfast, if it existed, might include ale and bread. Lunch would typically be pottage reheated from the night before, and dinner was more of the same. The bread was dark, coarse, and tough, nothing like the fluffy stuff we eat today. But food also varied depending on where you lived. A peasant in coastal France might have access to fish and shellfish, while someone in the Alps had cheese and wild herbs. In warmer climates like southern Spain, olives and dried fruits were more common. Geography mattered a lot. Seasonality also ruled the menu. Winter meals were heavy, storage-based, and often pickled or salted. Summer brought wild greens, herbs, and whatever grew fast enough to be eaten before it spoiled. Spring was the hungry season, reserves were low, and gardens hadn't produced yet. Monks, monasteries, and spiritual cuisine. Monasteries were the intellectual centers of the medieval world, and they took food very seriously, not because they were foodies, but because diet was tied to spiritual health. Most monasteries followed rules, like the Rule of St. Benedict, which outlined not only prayer and labor, but also meals. Monks usually ate twice a day, with no meat unless they were sick. Fish, cheese, legumes, and eggs were common. Their bread was better than the peasants', often baked in brick ovens inside the monastery. Some monasteries had their own herb gardens, vineyards, and fish ponds. They kept meticulous records of everything they grew, harvested, and cooked. If the medieval world had food scientists, it was monks in brown robes. Interestingly, monasteries helped preserve many Roman culinary techniques and recipes. Their writings on food storage, fermentation, and fasting serve as some of the best historical records we have today. Hunting, fishing, and finding protein. For nobles, hunting was both a sport and a way to secure luxurious meats. Deer, boar, rabbit, and game birds were hunted on estates and served with sauces made from berries, wine, and sometimes blood. Commoners, however, couldn't just grab a bow and chase deer. Hunting laws restricted game animals to the nobility. Poaching was punished harshly by death in some cases. Fishing was more accessible. Rivers, lakes, and oceans provided fish, eels, and shellfish. In fasting periods, when meat was banned, fish became the star. Even monasteries had man-made fish ponds for this reason. Beekeeping also provided calories. Honey wasn't just a sweetener, it was a preservative, a medicine, and sometimes a bribe. Farming and the food calendar. The entire food supply chain depended on agriculture, and agriculture followed the seasons. Spring, ploughing, planting barley and oats. Summer, maintenance, haymaking, and early harvests. Autumn, full harvest, grain milling, meat slaughtering. Winter, storage, preservation, and waiting. Crops included barley, rye, oats, wheat if you were lucky, beans, peas, and root vegetables. Chickens, pigs, and goats were common livestock for peasants. Cows were for milk first, meat second. Farming was backbreaking. The entire household helped men, women, and children. You couldn't survive without planning meals around what your land could produce. Tools of the trade, kitchens, and cooking. Cooking tools were basic, but effective: iron pots, clay ovens, wooden ladles, spit roasters, and open hearths. Peasants cooked in fireplaces or outdoor pits. Nobles had large kitchens staffed by dozens. Most meals were stewed or roasted. Baking required ovens, which were communal in villages. That's why bread was often taken to a central oven. Stone mortar, hand querns, and sieves were used to process flour and grains. Food prep was labor-intensive, slow, and required patience, especially without timers. Women in the medieval kitchen. Women were the unsung heroes of medieval cuisine. In peasant households, women cooked, preserved, and rationed food. They managed gardens, dairy production, and often brewed ale. In noble houses, women oversaw kitchen staff and meal planning. Their dowries sometimes included recipes or exclusive spice blends. Midwives and healers used food as medicine. Chicken broth, herbal infusions, and honey-based tonics were common remedies. From the early to the late Middle Ages, as Europe grew more urban and trade expanded, diets diversified. By the 14th century, cities had bakeries, butchers, breweries, and markets. Italian cities enjoyed pasta, almonds, and citrus. Paris had oysters and fine wine. London had imported pepper and ginger. The Black Death impacted food availability and labor, but also raised wages, improving diet for survivors. Suddenly, meat appeared on more tables. Religious laws and fasting. Medieval diets were shaped by the church. There were over 150 fasting days per year. No meat, only fish, dairy, or plant-based meals. Fridays, Lent, Advent all meant dietary restrictions. But people got creative. Beaver tails were considered fish. So was barnacle goose. Seriously. Feasting had its own rules. Some holidays required abundance, roast, ale, pies, and sweets. But guilt always followed gluttony with prayers. Medieval recipes. Today, you can try medieval dishes from historical cookbooks like Leviandia or the Form of Curie. Example recipe: pottage with barley, leeks, garlic, and herbs. Slow cooked 4 hours. Simple but hearty. Dessert: almond milk rice pudding with honey and cinnamon. Many museums and YouTubers recreate these recipes today with surprisingly tasty results. Myths and misconceptions. No, they didn't all eat moldy meat. And no, they didn't eat with filthy hands all the time. They had manners. They used knives. They shared bowls, but wiped spoons. And the idea that everything was grey and gross, that's modern bias. Medieval meals could be colourful, spiced, and beautifully presented, especially at noble feasts. Dining etiquette and table manners. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did have table manners. Nobles followed strict etiquette: don't reach across the table, don't bite into food with your knife, and for heaven's sake, don't wipe your mouth on the tablecloth. They shared bowls, but used their own spoons. There was no fork. Those were considered suspiciously extravagant in early centuries. People used knives and hands skillfully. Drinking had rules too. Never empty your cup before your lord does. And burping depends on the court. Some considered it rude, others a sign of satisfaction. Food and class. More than just taste, food was a visible marker of social status. The higher your class, the more variety you had and the more exotic ingredients showed up on your plate. Spices, sugar, white flour, and imported wines were all signs of affluence. Peasants rarely even smelled cinnamon. Meanwhile, nobles added it to meat and wine like it was ketchup. Even how food was served varied. Nobles had fine tablecloths, imported ceramics, and dedicated servers. Peasants, a wooden bowl, and whatever spoon you didn't lose last winter. Food in medieval arts and literature. We know what they ate in part, because they painted it, wrote about it, and sometimes even carved it into stone. Banquets are shown in illuminated manuscripts. Recipes are noted in poetic verse. Feast scenes appear in church carvings, tapestries, and court documents. Medieval writers like Chaucer even used food to signal character traits. A greedy abbot, he gets roast swan. A poor widow, dry bread and watery ale. Food for the sick, medieval medicine, and diet. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was medicine. The four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile ruled medical thinking, and food was chosen to balance them. If you had too much heat, eat something cold and moist like cucumber soup. Too melancholic, roast pork would do the trick. Doctors prescribed wine-soaked bread, herbal porridges, almond milk, and plenty of broth. Honey was a cure-all. And if you had the plague, garlic, vinegar, and crossing your fingers, sometimes at the same time. Children and food. From swaddling to stew, children didn't have special meals. From a young age, they ate what their parents ate, just smaller portions and fewer spices. Weaning foods included porridge, mashed vegetables, and watered-down ale. Sweets were rare but prized. A bit of fruit, honey cakes, or toasted barley. Meals were part of training. By age 7, noble children were learning table etiquette. By age 12, they might be serving food at someone else's banquet. Food in times of famine and war. When crops failed, or armies marched, food got scarce and strange. During sieges, people resorted to shoe leather soup, boiled bark, and whatever could be found. In famines, even grain husks and animal feed were ground into bread. Cities rationed food. Villages bartered. Monasteries gave out what they could. And nobility, they hoarded. These periods shaped medieval resilience and led to innovations in storage and preservation. Festival foods, holidays and celebrations. Holidays meant food. Big, rich, loud food. Easter brought lamb and green herbs. Christmas had goose, mince pies, and too much wine. Harvest festivals offered apple cider, pies, and roast pork. Special breads, dairy-rich dishes, and even gingerbread showed up during specific Saint days. Feasting was how people marked time. Even Lent had exceptions: fish pies, almond milk sweets, and that famous beaver tailor's fish loophole. Street food and urban snacks. Not everyone cooked at home. In medieval cities, street vendors sold pies, hot soup, fried fish, and bread. Markets bustled with food stalls, particularly on feast days. Vendors called out in rhyme. You could eat on the go with one hand holding your dagger, just in case. Penny pies and meat rolls were common. So were fried dough balls and mulled wine. In a way, medieval cities were the origin of fast food, just with more shouting. Food as diplomacy and power. Food wasn't just about feeding people, it was a political tool. Kings sent cheese wheels and wine barrels as gifts. Marriage alliances included recipe exchanges. Banquets showcased power, wealth, and the ability to feed hundreds. Feast reflected the strength of your kingdom. Feeding others meant you controlled the land, labor, and harvest. To rule was to serve meals, not just mandates. Food taboos and forbidden meals. Not all foods were fair game. The church forbade certain meals during fasts. Superstition banned others. Some towns had laws against selling bad meat or meat on holy days. Certain birds were considered sacred. Others, like cats, were last resort meals during famines. In some places, garlic was considered crude. In others, it was essential. Cultural taboos shaped diets as much as taste. Culinary inventions and lost dishes. Medieval cooks were inventive. They created mock meat, vegetable-based, color-shifting sauces, and pies with multiple fillings. Some dishes are lost to time. Eel porridge, pear mustard, or pickled nuts in rosewater. Others evolved into modern classics. Trenchers became plates, tarts became pies, and ale became, well, better ale. Some medieval recipes are being rediscovered, tested, and eaten today with surprisingly delicious results. Final reflections. Why it still matters. Medieval food isn't just about strange recipes or weird ingredients. It's about how people adapted, endured. From famine to feasting, every bite tells a story of class, culture, and community. By exploring what they ate, we learn how they lived, and maybe a little about ourselves. So the next time you try a new recipe, raise a glass of mead or a microwave burrito and give a nod to history. Welcome to Medieval Memoirs. Taverns, inns, and eating on the road. For travelers in medieval Europe, taverns and inns were more than rest stops, they were lifelines. A warm bowl of pottage, a tankard of ale, and a dry place to sleep made the difference between survival and misery. Taverns offered simple meals, bread, cheese, stews, and ale. Inns had better fare for nobles and merchants, roasted meats, sweet pies, and even local wine. Prices varied by distance from cities, and quality could range from delightful to deadly. Food poisoning was an ever-present risk, hence the popularity of heavily spiced, boiled, or burned dishes. How the plague changed the dinner table. The Black Death didn't just wipe out millions, it reshaped the food chain. With fewer workers, wages rose. Peasants could afford better food. Land changed hands. Diets diversified. In some cases, poor families ate meat regularly for the first time in generations. Urban centers saw a collapse in markets, but a rise in innovation. Soups were invented to stretch ingredients. Preservation methods improved, and comfort foods emerged. Bread and wine meant more after hardship. The medieval culinary profession, chefs, bakers, brewers, butchers, and spice merchants all formed guilds in major cities. Apprentices trained 4 years. Masters passed down secret spice blends. Recipes were written, tested, improved, and occasionally stolen. Noble kitchens employed dozens of specialists, sauce makers, spit turners, pastry cooks. Large households operated like restaurants, and the head cook, a mix of general, scientist, and artist. Feasting rituals by region. French feasts involved dozens of courses with theatrical flair. English feasts favored meat-heavy menus and mead. Germanic regions leaned into sausages, pickled cabbage, and strong ale. Italian courts layered dishes like art, cheese, fruits, breads, and wine, always wine. The Iberian Peninsula brought in spice, citrus, and Islamic influence. Even religious feasts varied by region. Local saints meant local specialties. Medieval desserts you've never heard of. Forget crème brûlée, how about almond milk custard with rose water? Or pears boiled in wine with saffron? Desserts were rare and elite. Most included honey, dried fruit, and spices. Rice puddings, fruit tarts, and fritters were favorites. Some desserts were savory sweet, using eggs and cheese. Others were almost medicinal: ginger, clove, or cinnamon for digestion. Kitchen fires and cooking accidents. Cooking with open flames in wood kitchens wasn't just a fire hazard, it was expected. Many homes burned down due to kitchen accidents. Boiling cauldrons spilled, knives slipped, ale exploded. Even monks had safety scrolls. How to keep embers under control. Some cooks became local legends, survivors of grease fires, ceiling collapses, or bear attacks. Yes, bears in food stores happened. Food waste and storage challenges. No refrigerators meant food had to be eaten fast or preserved well. Spoilage was common. Smells. Unforgiving. People reused everything. Bones for broth. Bread crusts for animal feed. Apple peels for vinegar. Cellars were meticulously managed. Mice and mold were enemies. Rot was a daily threat. Storage was warfare. Forbidden foods and sinful indulgences. Beyond taboos, some foods were considered morally corrupt. Rich stews during Lent. Sugar during fasts. Anything consumed with too much pleasure. Moralists wrote treatises against overindulgence. Gluttony was a sin, but people still broke rules privately, or with bribes. Secret feasts happened. Midnight pies. Hidden meats. Even the pious had cravings. Rebellions, revolts, and the roll of bread. Many uprisings began not with politics but hunger. The price of bread rising too fast sparked riots. Corrupt bakers faced public beatings. In some towns, bread was weighed and inspected before sale. Bread meant justice. Fair weight was law. And free bread days during festivals became political tools to calm the crowd. Final bite. Echoes on the plate. Medieval food was survival, ritual, community, power, art, medicine, politics, and craving. In every crust, every cauldron, every feast was a story, and that story still echoes today. Welcome to Medieval Memoirs, and thank you for staying until the final bite. Medieval gardens and culinary herbs. Beyond the field and forest, medieval people relied on kitchen gardens filled with culinary herbs and healing plants. Monasteries often had the best documented gardens, where they grew rosemary, sage, thyme, mint, and fennel. Herbs were used for seasoning, medicine, and even symbolic ritual. A sprig of rosemary for memory, parsley for digestion, and mint for freshness. These were the unsung flavor heroes of the medieval kitchen. The role of festivals in agricultural cycles. Feasting wasn't random, it marked time. Every phase of farming life had a festival. Planting, first sprout, first harvest, and final sheaf. These festivals were spiritual, seasonal, and full of food. Offerings to saints were given alongside loaves, cheese, and sometimes the season's first fruits. The calendar shaped the plate, each bite reflected where the year was. Preservation guilds and market regulation. Markets weren't medieval chaos, they had rules. Cities had guilds for everything: bakers, butchers, fishmongers, and salt traders. Inspectors ensured weights were fair and food was safe, or at least not deadly. Fraud was punished by public humiliation or worse. Guild secrets were closely guarded, and recipes were inherited like treasure. Medieval food and gender norms. Food was gendered. Men hunted, women cooked, but women also brewed, farmed, foraged, and managed entire kitchens. Food production was often one of the few domains where women held power economically and socially. A good cook could be as respected as a good priest. Midwives even prescribed recipes: onion soup for weakness, honey cakes for childbirth strength. A culinary tour of medieval Europe. France served buttery pastries and heavily sauced meats. Italy offered pastas, citrus, and spiced desserts. Germany delivered sausages, rye bread, and beer. England was meat-heavy and seasonal. Spain mixed Islamic, Jewish, and Christian flavors. The Baltic region favored hearty stews and pickled fish. Each kingdom cooked differently, but all valued warmth, nourishment, and celebration. Food symbolism in religion and art. The Last Supper, the loaves and fishes, the sacred wine. Food was at the core of religious storytelling. Artists filled churches with food symbols: grapes for salvation, fish for Christ, bread for sacrifice. Feasts symbolized heaven. Fasting mirrored struggle. Eating was rarely just physical, it was spiritual. Medieval cooking techniques forgotten today. Clay pot slow roasting, hanging birds by the beak, using ash to preserve eggs, fermenting milk in animal stomachs. These methods were labor-intensive, but effective. Many were lost after industrialization. Some are being revived today by historical chefs. There's something deeply human in reclaiming those slow, smoky, hands-on techniques. Legendary medieval chefs and food myths. Some cooks became legends not just for their feasts, but for surviving disaster or pleasing kings. One tale tells of a chef who saved a castle siege with a soup so good enemies asked for the recipe. Myths grew around food: magic cauldrons, bread that's healed, stew that made you fall in love, and sometimes poison pie, cooking for crowds, banquets, armies, and monasteries. Feeding 200 people with no fridge, gas, or electricity. It was an art form. Large events required field kitchens, prep crews, and schedules. Army cooks used cauldrons the size of bathtubs. Monks cooked for dozens daily, on rotation. Portioning was crucial. Salted meat had to last. Bread had to rise in time. Boiling over meant delay or disaster. Echoes of the medieval table in modern life. Charcuterie boards. Medieval. Community feasts. Medieval. Seasonal eating. Very medieval. Even our love for comfort food echoes the past: hearty, hot, simple, shared. When we slow cook, gather around food, or tell stories while passing bread, we're closer to the Middle Ages than we think. And that's the true feast of medieval memoirs. Like, comment, and subscribe for more flavors of forgotten history. If you enjoyed this journey through medieval dining, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Medieval Memoirs, your portal to the past, one feast at a time.